Okay, so today we're going to pick up with section 5.2 and the price elasticity of supply. One of the things you'll notice really fast with price elasticity of supply is that it is pretty much the same thing as price elasticity of demand with respect to formulas, with respect to concepts, but it's obviously on the supply side, not the demand side. So it'll differ. It'll differ there. Quickly, by definition, we are looking at the fact that the price elasticity of supply is a measure of the responsiveness of the quantity supplied of a good to a change in its price. That's almost the identical definition for price elasticity of demand. Only difference is, instead of a measure of the responsiveness of the quantity demanded of a good, this is the measurement of the responsiveness of the quantity supplied of a good to its change. So you can see that down here. And again, essentially, how much more are sellers willing to produce if the price increases? How much less are they willing to produce if the price decreases? And the basic question, again, what's the slope of the curve between two specific points, right? So when there's a price change, which is represented on a supply curve, right, what's the slope of that curve? How much reaction will there be with quantity supplied in response to that price change? Again, pretty simple. So the calculation itself is also very similar and very simple. We basically are going to take the price elasticity of supply, and that equals the percent change in quantity demanded, or quantity supplied, excuse me. See, there's an error on my part that you can't afford to make, over the percent change in price. Okay, it's a very simple formula, and it is identical. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is that for both of these, you are going to use the midpoint method. If you remember that from our last set of videos on 5.1, you should be all set. Now, with price elasticity of demand. With price elasticity of supply, we're going to deal with a couple more definitions. Okay, so we're going to see elastic goods when the percentage change in quantity supplied is greater than the percentage change in price. We're going to see inelastic goods when the percentage change in quantity supplied is less than the percentage change in price. And we're going to see unit elastic goods when the percentage change in quantity supplied is equal to the percentage change in price. Again, all this, right, is very, very similar to our price elasticity of demand. As with these over here, perfectly elastic supply and perfectly elastic demand, they're going to be very similar as well. When the quantity supplied changes by a very large percentage in response to an almost 0% change in price, you have what is called perfectly elastic supply. And when the percent change in quantity supplied is 0 in response to any percentage change in price, you have perfectly inelastic supply. And believe it or not, we're actually going to see an example of perfectly elastic supply and a concept for perfectly inelastic. What you see up here is actually silicone, okay, and that's the example we're going to give for a perfectly elastic supply. But the main influences on the price elasticity of supply are production possibilities. That can be broken up into three different categories. You have opportunity cost, quantity, and time elapsed since the last price change. And then we'll get back to storage possibilities in a minute, and but for now we're going to deal with the production possibilities and the opportunity cost. The opportunity cost can and does vary, right? We know that because we know that almost no supply curves or production possibilities frontier are straight, right? And so opportunity cost can and does vary. And we also know that the opportunity cost for the vast majority of things increases with quantity. And so when you have something where the quantity or the opportunity cost, increases with quantity, you're going to have a relatively elastic PES, price elasticity of supply. But when you have an example like silicon, silicon's produced at a very, very small and a constant, nearly constant opportunity cost. And as a result, you're going to have perfectly elastic supply. So what will that look like? When you see a perfectly elastic supply curve, okay, again, a perfectly elastic supply curve means that basically we're going to see a supply curve that looks like that. The quantity will change drastically with a very, very limited change in price. So again, you have, remember, price here and quantity here, and that helps you visualize that. Now, the opposite of that would be a perfectly inelastic curve, which will look like that. Okay? And that would happen when you have a drastically different scenario. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But for now, we'll step down into quantity. There are goods out there that can only be produced in fixed quantity. For example, luxury waterfront property in a specific area. Okay, we say specific area because we have zoning laws, right? So in those types of places, you're going to have laws that restrict the amount of property that can be used to create new homes, new properties. And so for those, you're going to have essentially a perfectly inelastic supply. It can't change. We cannot change the quantity supplied because we have laws limiting it, or we have, whether they're our laws or they're nature's laws, they limit it. And so what we basically get is goods that have a seemingly unlimited quantity will be more elastic. Goods that have a more limited quantity will be less elastic, okay, or inelastic. The time elapsed since the last price change is also similar to price elasticity of demand. In this, however, we're thinking about it from the perspective of the supplier. Oftentimes, a price change will happen, and a supplier just can't react fast enough, right? And so the price elasticity of supply is going to be rather inelastic in the short term, or what people often call the near term. But in the longer term, their price elasticity of supply will increase and potentially become elastic. And the longer we get away from the price change, the more likely that is to happen. Now, a couple reasons for that. If you think about it just from the standpoint of ability to change a factory for manufactured goods, it makes sense, right? We need to we hope that we're operating at full capacity, so we need to make some adjustments. Once those adjustments are made, our ability to adjust a little bit more becomes easier or becomes better. Storage possibilities. So we'll get back to storage possibilities. That's another thing that's going to influence the price elasticity of supply. Goods that can easily be stored will likely be more elastic than goods that cannot be easily stored. It's a pretty simple concept, nuts and bolts, but here's how you think about it. Okay, if I can store a great deal of my goods, I can adjust. So in times when I need to, when there is a price decrease, right, I'm going to want to have less on the market. At the same time, I'm not necessarily going to want to cut down my manufacturing because, number one, it's not easy to do that. Number two, I don't want to make a major decision with respect to manufacturing that might be very short-lived. So what I do is I store those goods. Now, when I store them with a price cut, I can easily then react to the drop in price, making my good elastic, And when that price goes back up, I can more readily flood the market, or not flood the market necessarily, but hit the market with what I am willing to sell, without needing to make a short-term manufacturing decision. I can put on the market what I had stored from a previous price cut when the price increases, and therefore I can react more quickly and be more elastic in the short term. So obviously storage possibilities is going to come back and affect the issue that we had with our time elapsed since the last price change. Now, so price elasticity of supply, very similar to price elasticity of demand, but different. What we're going to see in the next section is the income elasticity of demand, which will be a little different than both of these two, but again seem very similar. And then in the following we'll deal with the cross elasticity of demand, which will again sound somewhat similar but be even more different. All right.